Hey, welcome, Talent Warriors. Today is something unique. It is a solo podcast, and we're going to do about 15 to 20 minute session, a simple tip session on assessing your talent, what you can do to be even better with your accuracy rate. And I want to start out with just a little bit of a story. And I was helping a firm search. Well, we were in the client engagement phase, and somebody said, hey, isn't this just like a roll of the dice? It's a 50-50 proposition. Look, if we get it right, great. But, why should we pay you? It was a very interesting question, because in our business, you can never take for granted that people appreciate and understand the value of search. And so thankfully, or ideally, I was quick on my feet. And I was saying, it's like going to Las Vegas and just throwing your money out on the table and playing your cards and hoping for the best. The house is always going to beat you if you don't know what you're doing. And I shared with him that learning to count cards, learning the strategies, learning what to look for that means bet more, and when to walk away, when to check, all of those skills are something that you can teach. And while not the best analogy for hiring, it's certainly apropos. And so as we kind of go through this, I'm going to follow a little bit of the book, but editorialize, because, when you write a book, you have to be very, very crisp. You have to be very pointed. You edit, re-edit the edits. Sometimes it's mind-numbing, as, Mike and I would say, that by the end of writing your book, you've come to hate it because you've read it and rewritten so many times. But we really do love our book, and we think, it couldn't be more topical. And one of the last sections of the book is about assessing talent. And what's interesting is my experience over 20 years, and there are plenty of companies doing great things, and not exactly this, but on the business side, many times it's about writing a job description and throwing it over the fence so your talent acquisition team just catches it and then goes and executes. It's like placing an order at Amazon, and you think it's going to be delivered, and you get to sort through the packages and pick the one you want. In today's great resignation, in today's ever-changing economy, you need to be very, very purposeful in how you hire, from creating the role to understanding what's successful in the role, to partnering with your talent acquisition team and your HR business partners. The number one thing for me that business leaders and the managers that I've worked with get wrong is they start the process well before assessing talent, well before the interviews. They don't even take a hard look at what success looks like. So one of the first things that you can do, and now, mind you, not every position's the same, and there are some positions that are going to be lower hourly wage. We're talking about hiring salary professionals here, is understanding very, very clearly what success looks like. Which of the 9 attributes that we list in our book are critical for this particular role? Now, obviously, if you're hiring somebody in the sales field, inside field sales, sales engineer, there's going to be a certain amount of drive, resiliency, creative thinking. There'll be a lot of personality factors that go into it. But curiosity may not be one of those traits. There are a lot of things that may not fall into that. But if you're hiring a software developer, the effective intelligence and curiosity may need to be off the charts. The point being is that we see often a laundry list of objective requirements, points of fact, 2 to 4 years, 5 to 7 years of experience managing or leading people, or working in this industry, dealing with this particular product. The list can absolutely be endless. And in most cases, what ends up happening is business leaders have champagne taste and a beer pocketbook, and they load everything into a job description. And what you end up with is a unicorn. So you have your talent acquisition team searching for a profile that may or may not exist. And none of those objective requirements listed in the job description actually predict success in the role. So the first thing that you need to do is know and define success. Pick your 3 to 4 key attributes that you want to see in that role. Once you get beyond that, make sure you're having a very detailed conversation with your recruiter, your talent acquisition consultant or specialist, so that they understand, if they don't already, because they should be students of the business, that they understand the team dynamics, why you're hiring, what role they're filling within the team, not just the job title and responsibilities. Then you need to define your hiring team. You need to understand that A players select A players. And countless times I've seen candidates go into interviews. You're grabbing somebody at the last minute. B players select B players and C players, whatever the cat dragged in. And it's a horrible experience for top talent. So select A players who have the humble confidence to recognize in another what brings success to the team. And those who aren't afraid of it, those who will be challenged by it or want to be surrounded by other A players. Then make sure that you train them so that each person has an assigned role when they interview. As a candidate myself, there are very few things as irritating and demonstrative of the lack of preparation as to go from interview to interview to interview and spend half to a full day answering the very same questions that the previous person just asked me. Now, I can put a different spin on it, but it tells me that they don't know what they're looking for. And in today's environment where top talent has even more choices than any time that I can remember, that process needs to be engaging, it needs to be thoughtful, and it needs to be challenging. Now, with these A players, one cardinal rule is make sure the team is not homogenous. Said more simply, if you're in sales or your product or you're in service, grab an A player from finance, grab an A player from customer support, some other department that doesn't have a specific stake in the success of that role, but rather has a stake in the success of the company. That is a good person to gauge the results when they go through the interview. Now, each one of these A players for the third step needs to have a standard set of questions, and those questions are tailored by the attributes that you defined as success. Now, your recruiter, your talent acquisition specialist, should absolutely have been screening for the table stakes. We don't tell you, nowhere in the book, nowhere does any member of our team say experience doesn't matter, but it's not necessarily predictive of success. So once the initial table stakes have been met, the basic requirements, you can close that gate, and now it's about character. So those success attributes, those character attributes, you have to be assigning those to each member of the interviewing team. Now, ideally, you should keep the same interviewing team over and over and over. So at the end of the process, you can have a feedback loop. You can actually go back and see how each person scored, calibrate them, and have a team that gets better and better and better at interviewing. Now, you're going to have to sign somebody. The fourth tip is to create pressure. Some of those things can be as simple as, hey, tell me about a time where you had to give bad news to your boss and you had to tell the truth, even though it might mean negative consequences for you. The person that doesn't have an example, you need to start to be concerned about that person, because we've all had to face sharing bad news, sharing a shortcoming, sharing a failure, a missed objective with our bosses, with our team. And those are the moments where we learn. So not only does that question speak to integrity, but it speaks to our learning ability, our learning agility. You can also create pressure asking about those very failures, not just talking about them, but what did they learn? Any candidate that hasn't failed, I'd argue, absent them being fresh out of college, and even then, if they don't have a failure, most environments today are going to be too challenging for those people. So you want somebody who's failed at something. Now, that doesn't mean something catastrophic, like they blew up half of our manufacturing facility because of a safety violation or an ethical violation. It simply means when did they set an objective and not meet that objective according to the timeline. That's all. And you're not to be concerned with the failure itself. You need to be concerned with what did they learn? How did they plan? What was their thought process going into it? How did they navigate the shortcomings? How did they go back and fix what they did wrong? So the next example they give you takes the lessons that they learned from the failure and puts them to good use.
This episode is sponsored by Talent War Group, a management consulting and executive search firm. A record number of employees left their jobs this year, and 52% of them are considering quitting or changing professions as you're listening to this podcast. The talent market continues to become more and more competitive each day. To win, you must reevaluate your employee experience and talent acquisition strategy. Talent War Group can help you identify your unique value proposition to attract new qualified candidates and create an effective and strategic plan to retain your A players. Visit talentwargroup.com to get started.
Now, having A players, having a team, having standardized questions, you absolutely need to have a method for scoring. And there's so many people that, well, I got to admit, in today's litigious society, people are very, very scared to put notes in an applicant tracking system or a CRM and say, you know, this person was not energetic, they didn't smile, they lacked eye contact, any number of those things. And I understand. But you can have a very standardized scorecard, and it allows you to compare candidates against other candidates, apples to apples, to make it simple. And you need to have those attributes out. You need to have the experience in there. How does each candidate rank? You need to make the scoring as objective as you possibly can. Although some interviewers are going to obviously have some swings in how they evaluate a particular answer. Once you get a candidate through the process, oh, and by the way, do not let one interviewer talk to another before they've seen the candidate. You absolutely have to make sure that you remove all the bias in the process that you possibly can. There's nothing worse, and I'll give you a quick war story. I had a chief financial officer and a CHRO, chief human resource officer, that office next door to one another. And as far as the C-suite, they were pretty close. They worked together wonderfully, two great human beings, two really good leaders. But I'd run executives through them. And I'd ask for feedback from one, they'd copy the other, and generally they'd be echoing the same comments. There was just something that I knew that they couldn't be that similar through that many candidates that consistently. So I went back and I challenged them and I said, hey, just patronize me. Get me your feedback separate and do not talk to the other. It didn't take but the next candidate before they both came back to me with wildly different evaluations of the same executive. And I brought that back and shared that with them. And I said, this is the value. If everybody's thinking alike, nobody's thinking, as George Patton said it. And so in the interviewing process, you want people giving their independent opinion, especially as A players. At the very end, you can all get together and discuss and defend your positions or ask more questions about somebody else's position. But the fact is, you have to remove all bias. The scorecard will help you do that because let me say this, no matter how good you are at assessing talent, removing biases reinforces the idea that you can't see talent. You have to have a process that reveals it, that reveals character, that reveals potential, gives you an estimation of that potential, and gives you a much clearer idea. And any time that that is not standardized, is not with A players, is not scored accordingly, your potential for making a bad hire goes up astronomically. So, as I've shared with people, my teams have hired over 80,000 people, and I have a couple of my peers and colleagues that are in the same boat that I am. We have astronomical numbers, and we've had the gift of working at scale. And so we've gotten to see so much. But each one of us would tell you that the minute we get away from a process, the minute we start thinking, or said differently, The minute my ego comes forward and says, you know what, George? Yeah, this guy's going to hammer it. I am throwing everything that I've learned out the window and letting my ego lead the way. And that is never a way to pick talent. Now, I want to, because this is supposed to be short and just give you some helpful tips, I would tell you the number one place that standardized questions and a standardized process helps you is in the case of nepotism. Of all of the kind of hires that have gone wildly wrong, especially at the senior leader and executive level, are those who've been referred in, buddies, pals, friends of an executive at another firm. And the email that the recruiter, or the hiring manager, or the team gets is, hey, this is a rock star. They work with me at company ABC and they just killed it. And I know they're going to kill it here. It's exactly the mindset we need. Great character, great this, great that. And by the time you get done reading the email, you think this candidate's hung the moon. You still must put them through the process. There are too many examples in pro sports and corporate America where a number one draft choice or a favorite person from an executive has come into an environment and they have failed miserably. And the reason they fail is because everybody simply took for granted that how they performed in a previous environment is absolutely predictive of success in your environment. Your environment is singularly unique. The people are different. The bureaucracy is different. The culture is different. The way of working is different. So you have to evaluate even those huge, amazing rock star referrals through the success profile by your A players with standardized questions and standardized scorecard. And if they're as good as the person who referred them, it should show up on the scorecard. But it also says back to all the executives that we have a high standard and we're going to put them through the process. And if you're an executive or senior leader out there and you're thinking about referring somebody, you need to trust the process. You need to trust the managers. You need to trust your talent acquisition team to evaluate that candidate fairly, because there's nothing worse than taking for granted that they'll be successful in a different environment, giving that benefit of the doubt, and oh, by the way, selling this person on what a great opportunity this is for them. So make sure that you define success and you have your 3 to 4 character attributes that define success. Define and assign and train your A players. Some people are naturally good interviewers. That's great. But make sure that you train them. Certainly in today's litigious society with so many questions that could trigger snowflakes or trigger candidates, make sure that you've trained them appropriately, because the only thing we're discriminating in is performance and how somebody presents themselves. And do they answer and do they demonstrate the success attributes? Make sure that each person's assigned a role. Create pressure. Remove all your biases. And then bring everybody together and select the best candidate. Now, even when you select the best candidate, the better the process, the more the candidate knows that this is a top flight organization that she or he wants to work for. So make sure that process is challenging, make sure it's engaging, and make sure it's personal to the candidate. Now, lastly, I always put the hiring manager at the end, because if we start seeing the signs as a talent acquisition specialist, at some point, I'm going to tip off that hiring manager and just say, when you're done, we may want to have another conversation before they leave the building, or we may want to schedule a subsequent Zoom, Teams meeting, or what have you. The last thing is top talent has choices in this market, without a doubt. Make sure that the hiring manager and the recruiter know what they are selling. Let me say it again. The opposite of people resigning in the Great Resignation, they don't necessarily leave bad companies, but they always leave bad bosses. So if you want to attract people, you've got to show people that you're going to be the leader that somebody should work from. And I've given this example countless times, and I still to this day thank Caroline Atherton of HP for this great interview. And I was going to an interview to have a very big role at HP early in my career. And she asked me, why the hell should I hire you? And I rattled off a host of reasons. And she said, did I have any questions? And I said, yeah. Why the hell should I work for you? Pretty bold move at the time, but I was secure in my job. And to this day, I've never gotten a better answer. And she, without any hesitation, said, I am going to help you check every empty block on your resume. I am going to help you grow your career and be the most well-rounded human resources professional. Nowhere else will you get this experience. Nowhere else will you get this investment. And nowhere else are you going to be as challenged. Anybody that confident with that kind of answer, she had me hooked. She had me hooked, and I had done thousands of interviews, but it's still to this day, to me, very much of a gold standard answer. So bosses out there, know why somebody should work for you. Know what you're giving them, know what challenges, what value you provide, and how you're going to invest in that top talent. It's harder than ever to hire the best talent. There's just no getting around it. But you don't want to miss the opportunity by having a biased, half-assed process. So you're not distinguishing who is talent and who's not talent for your organization. Put in the work before you put together a job description. Know success, have a great team, have a great process, and know why somebody should work for you. It will increase your odds, and you get better and better with every iteration. You won't be perfect, but you'll be bringing in the right people that exponentially help your organization. So Talent Warriors, until the next time, I hope these tips were helpful. I hope you like this little bit of a shorter version, but I wish you the best of success, because the one true difference is not the product, is not the service, it's your people. And when you get that right, everything else is a whole lot easier. Until next time, this is Talent War Podcast. We're out. And thank you for listening to the Talent War Podcast, where we discuss all things talent, focusing on a true talent mindset, which is the core belief that the only true competitive advantage you can hope to achieve and maintain is your talent. Join us for the next episode of the Talent War Podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you like what you heard, subscribe, please leave a review, and connect with Dr. Tom Lokar and myself on Talent War Group's LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram accounts, and send your comments and inquiries to media@Talent War Group. The Talent War Podcast is brought to you by the Talent War Group, a management consulting and executive search firm. With services like talent acquisition, leadership development, seminars, and executive coaching, we will work with you to create talent solutions to your business problems. To get started, please visit us at www.talentwargroup.com.